Fascinated by the phenomenon, he recorded a video as a memory and asked a local about it. White ring high above the clouds.
Oh, blessed Jesus, look at that. Wow. How many?
Have you noticed how strange events are happening almost at the same time? Across the United States, with no rain and no alert, thick, muddy water violently erupted from the ground, ripping through streets as people ran in panic. At the very same time, the sky demanded attention. A flawless blue ring appeared overhead, perfectly formed, suspended as if time itself paused. Then a cloud emerged, shaped unmistakably like a human figure, arms stretched wide, glowing quietly in the sunlight. Moments later, fire tore through the sky, a blazing object igniting, fragmenting, then vanishing without a trace. These weren't isolated events. They happened together below our feet and above our heads. Coincidence, or a signal we were meant to notice? If something feels off, hit like and stay with me. Just moments ago, residents in Reading witnessed something no one expects to see in an ordinary American city. There was no storm warning, no heavy rain pounding the streets, no buildup. And then, without notice, the ground itself erupted. From intact pavement, thick, muddy water burst upward with force, shooting into the air like columns driven from beneath the earth. This was not water flowing downhill. It was not runoff. It rose violently, as if pressure had been building unseen, waiting for the exact moment to break through. The water was dark and heavy, saturated with sediment. It carried the color and weight of something pulled from deep underground layers, not from surface drains. Witnesses described the shock of watching normal city roads transform into unstable ground in seconds. Cars were pushed off course. Streets became impassable. People could be heard retreating, shouting warnings, stepping back as if the earth itself had become unsafe to stand on. This was not a slow failure. It was sudden, aggressive, disruptive. The kind of event that leaves people silent afterward, struggling to understand what they just saw. Officials moved quickly to calm the situation. Explanations followed: aging infrastructure, ruptured pipes, underground pressure, familiar words, logical terms. Yet even as explanations circulated, unease remained. Because infrastructure failures do not usually behave like eruptions. They leak, they crack, they sink. What happened here forced water upward, violently, as though something below had been released all at once. That distinction matters. In Scripture, when catastrophic water events are described, the focus is not only on rain from above. In the account of Noah's flood, Genesis records something far more unsettling. The fountains of the great deep were broken up. Judgment did not begin solely with clouds opening. It began with the earth itself failing from below. That detail is often overlooked, but it changes the picture entirely. Water rising from beneath speaks of instability, where people assume permanence. Roads are built on the belief that the ground will hold. Cities expand on the assumption that what lies below is solid, predictable, and controlled. When that assumption fails, it shakes more than infrastructure. It shakes confidence. The events in Reading force an uncomfortable question into the open. If water can suddenly surge upward from unseen depths, what else lies beneath our systems, our cities, our sense of security? And how much pressure is building out of sight? This was not rain overwhelming drains. This was the ground asserting itself without warning. Scripture consistently uses the earth's behavior as a sign not to provoke panic, but to provoke awareness. When foundations tremble or break open, the message is not merely physical, it is symbolic. It reminds people that stability is not guaranteed simply because yesterday felt normal. When water rises from below instead of falling from above, it signals that something foundational has shifted. And once foundations begin to move, events rarely remain isolated. While the ground was violently breaking open below, the story did not remain confined to the streets. Almost at the same time, attention was drawn upward, far above the chaos unfolding on the Earth's surface. As if the disturbance below was being mirrored above, something unusual appeared in the sky that demanded explanation. Passengers aboard a commercial flight captured footage of a perfectly defined blue circle suspended among the clouds. It was not faint. It was not distorted. It was sharply outlined, vivid in color, and unmistakably circular. Against the shifting white and gray of surrounding cloud layers, this formation stood apart, unnaturally precise, visually isolated, and impossible to ignore. Unlike ordinary cloud patterns, the blue circle did not drift with the wind. It did not stretch, thin out, or dissolve as clouds normally do. It remained still, fixed, held in place, as if anchored. While nearby clouds shifted and flowed, this formation maintained its structure, giving the unsettling impression of something intentional rather than atmospheric. Observers struggled to describe what they were seeing. Many said it resembled an opening, like a doorway or gate, suspended in the heavens. Others compared it to a lens or aperture, as though the sky itself had been punctured for a brief moment. What unsettled viewers most was not its color or shape, but its behavior. The sky was moving. The circle was not. That contrast matters. In the same way, the eruption of water from the ground defied expectations of how infrastructure fails, this formation defied expectations of how clouds behave. Both events challenged what people assume is stable, predictable, and understood. Below, the earth forced its way upward. Above, the heavens appeared to hold something open. Biblical texts frequently describe moments when the heavens were opened, before periods of warning, revelation, or transition. These moments were not described as permanent changes, but as brief openings, windows through which humanity was allowed to glimpse something beyond the ordinary flow of time and nature. That language is striking when placed beside modern footage of a perfectly shaped opening in the sky. Scripture often presents signs in layers, the earth responding, the sky responding, and humanity standing in between, forced to interpret, forced to choose whether to dismiss or to pay attention. Rarely are warnings isolated to one realm. When both below and above react, the message becomes harder to ignore. This raises a sobering question. If the ground beneath our feet is breaking open, while the sky above displays signs that resist natural explanation, are we witnessing coincidence or coordination? Are these simply rare anomalies captured at the same time, or signals aligned to draw attention from both directions at once? Moments like this are not meant to entertain, they are meant to awaken. Stay with me, because what appeared next in the sky only deepens the pattern and the urgency. Not long after the blue circle faded from view, another image began to circulate, one that carried a very different weight. This time, it was not geometry or color that drew attention, but form. A cloud formation appeared that bore a striking resemblance to a human figure, upright and unmistakable in posture. The shape was not abstract. A head-like outline was visible. A torso seemed defined. Arms appeared extended outward, not raised in motion, but open still, deliberate, and balanced. What unsettled many viewers was not how dramatic it looked, but how recognizable it felt. The human mind searches for patterns, yet this shape required little imagination to perceive. Surrounding the figure was a soft, golden glow. It was not intense or blinding. There was no flash, no burst of light, no spectacle demanding fear. Instead, the glow appeared calm, almost gentle, as if illuminating the figure without overwhelming the sky around it. The clouds did not churn violently. The scene did not erupt into chaos. It simply appeared. Those who witnessed it did not react with panic. There were no screams, no frantic movements. Instead, many stood still. Some filmed silently. Others lowered their phones altogether, as if recording suddenly felt insufficient. The dominant reaction was quiet attention, the kind that happens when people sense meaning but struggle to articulate it. Throughout the Bible, clouds are repeatedly linked with divine presence, guidance, and authority. From the pillar of cloud that led Israel through the wilderness, to the cloud that descended upon Mount Sinai, to the cloud that overshadowed Jesus at the Transfiguration, clouds are portrayed not as random backdrops, but as vehicles of revelation. They conceal and reveal at the same time. What makes this image unsettling is not that it demanded belief. It did not. It made no announcement. It issued no threat. It arrived without instruction and faded without explanation. Yet its presence lingered longer than more dramatic sights often do. There was no spectacle to debate, only an image that quietly impressed itself upon memory. Unlike events that shock through violence or destruction, this moment unsettled through restraint. It did not force interpretation. It invited reflection. That difference sets it apart. In times of relative calm, such imagery might be dismissed as coincidence, illusion, or imagination. But context matters. This appearance came amid growing global unrest, political instability, environmental disruption, social fracture, and widespread anxiety. When foundations feel unstable, people become more sensitive to symbols that suggest authority, oversight, or presence beyond human control. The question left behind is not whether this image proves anything. Scripture itself warns against chasing signs for proof alone. The deeper question is why imagery so closely associated with divine symbolism continues appearing during a period marked by uncertainty and tension across the world. Not every message arrives with thunder. Some appear quietly, framed in clouds, leaving behind not answers, but unease, reflection, and the sense that something greater may be observing as history accelerates. Videos began surfacing that showed something few could immediately explain: a glowing spherical object suspended high in the sky. It was not blinking. It did not move like an aircraft. It appeared steady, bright, and isolated against the darkness, drawing attention simply by existing where nothing else should have been. Then, without warning, the object changed. The glow intensified. A sudden ignition followed. The sphere appeared to rupture, breaking apart as fiery fragments scattered downward, streaking briefly before fading from view. The transformation was fast, violent, and unmistakable. What moments earlier looked contained and whole became unstable, burning itself apart in mid-air. Witnesses struggled to identify what they were seeing. The event did not match common descriptions of commercial aircraft, military flares, or routine space activity. There was no visible trajectory consistent with normal flight paths, no controlled descent, no familiar pattern, just ignition, fragmentation, and disappearance. As footage spread, questions multiplied. Officials did not immediately confirm the object as a meteor, satellite re-entry, or controlled test. No clear explanation followed in real time. That absence of certainty only heightened the tension surrounding the event. When fire appears in the heavens without context, people instinctively sense that it matters. Throughout Scripture, burning objects in the sky are rarely treated as meaningless. Burning stars, falling fire, and lights descending from above are consistently linked to warning, judgment, or transition, not random destruction. In Revelation, a great star, burning like a torch, falls from heaven. In prophetic language, fire in the sky often signals disruption to what feels permanent and secure. The symbolism is hard to ignore. Fire represents exposure. It consumes, reveals, and transforms. When something burns in the heavens, it suggests instability in what people assume is distant, untouchable, and ordered. The sky has long been viewed as a realm of consistency: sunrise, sunset, stars fixed in their courses. When that order appears disturbed, even briefly, it commands attention. Whether this object was natural or unknown is almost beside the point. The visual itself carried weight. A luminous body igniting and breaking apart above the earth adds urgency to an already unsettling sequence of events. Ground ruptures below. Signs form in the sky. Figures appear in clouds. And now, fire falls from above. Patterns matter more than isolated explanations. Scripture often describes warning not as a single event, but as accumulation signs layered one upon another, increasing in frequency and intensity. Each individual occurrence can be rationalized. Together, they create pressure. They force awareness. They demand interpretation. This burning object did not cause visible destruction on the ground, yet its impact was psychological. It reinforced a sense that things once assumed stable are becoming unpredictable. That boundaries between earth and sky, known and unknown, are being tested. When fire appears above, humanity instinctively looks up. And when people look up, they begin to ask questions they've avoided. If this feels significant to you, press like, leave your thoughts in the comments, subscribe, and stay with me, because when signs begin stacking like this, they rarely stop with just one. As fire appeared in the heavens and instability revealed itself above the earth, another sign surfaced far from cities and skylines, hidden beneath slow-moving water, out of ordinary sight. While attention was fixed upward, something below was shifting in silence. Deep within the wetlands of South Florida's Everglades, footage emerged showing a sight few were prepared to process. Dozens, then hundreds of massive Burmese pythons, some exceeding 6 meters in length, were captured moving together beneath the surface. These were not isolated sightings, not a single snake crossing a camera's frame. This was scale, density, motion repeating itself across wide stretches of water. What made the footage unsettling was not size alone. It was coordination. The pythons did not scatter. They did not hunt independently. They did not display the solitary, territorial behavior typically associated with apex predators. Instead, they flowed in the same direction, bodies sliding through dark water in near unison, adjusting speed and spacing as if responding to a shared signal. Observers described it as less like animals and more like a system, many bodies, one movement. Scientists moved quickly to offer explanations: seasonal migration, breeding convergence, environmental pressure. Yet even within those explanations came a critical admission. This level of large-scale synchronization is extremely rare. Burmese pythons are typically solitary. They do not form coordinated masses. They do not move together across such distances in such numbers. That rarity is the point. When behavior deviates sharply from what is considered normal, it signals disruption, either in habitat, instinct, or pressure, unseen from above the surface. Something changed. Something triggered movement on a scale not commonly observed in the American landscape. In biblical symbolism, great serpents and creatures of the deep are rarely neutral imagery. They represent forces hidden beneath order, power restrained, chaos contained, threats that remain unseen until conditions allow them to surface. Scripture often contrasts signs in the heavens with stirrings in the depths, placing humanity between what is above and what is below. The Everglades has long been viewed as ancient, resilient, and quietly enduring. A place where time moves differently, where layers of history overlap beneath water and grass. When something massive moves there in unison, it suggests a response to conditions deeper than surface explanations, pressures building over time, now released. Water, in Scripture, often symbolizes separation between realms, the visible and the concealed, the controlled and the uncontrollable. When creatures of the deep begin to move collectively, it implies that boundaries are being tested, balance is shifting, restraint is loosening. This footage did not come with immediate destruction. No towns were overrun, no sudden catastrophe followed. But warning does not always arrive as impact. Sometimes it arrives as pattern repetition, scale, alignment, fire above, signs in the sky, earth breaking open. And now, synchronized movement beneath American waters. When the deep begins to stir, Scripture suggests it is not random. It points to something long, restrained, responding to a change in conditions. Something dormant, reacting to a signal. The chilling thought is not what the pythons were doing, but why now? In another region, far from the earlier sightings, the sky took on a color few people forget once they see it. Dark storm clouds rolled in slowly, but instead of the usual gray or deep blue, they carried an unnatural greenish glow. It was the kind of color that immediately signals danger, not just weather, but severity. The air felt heavy. The light felt wrong. As lightning began flashing within the clouds, the sky briefly revealed something more disturbing. Each burst of light carved shadows into the cloud mass, and within those shadows, shapes began to form. Not random outlines, not fleeting blurs. Many viewers described seeing a figure resembling a multi-headed creature, broad, looming, and asymmetrical, emerging and vanishing with each flash. The image was never sharp enough to capture details with certainty. No clear edges, no fixed outline. Yet, it was distinct enough that people independently described the same thing. Social media filled with slowed footage, screenshots, and frame-by-frame analysis. The discussion spread, not because the image was obvious, but because it was persistent. Skeptics were quick to respond. Optical illusion, they said, a combination of lightning angles, cloud density, and human pattern recognition. The brain, searching for meaning where none exists. And those explanations are not without merit. Storm systems are capable of producing strange visual effects, especially when light refracts through dense cloud layers. But explanation does not always erase impact. Others pointed out something harder to dismiss: the resemblance to ancient symbolic imagery, particularly descriptions found in the Book of Revelation. In biblical language, multi-headed beasts are not zoological creatures, they are representations. Symbols of chaotic power, rebellion, and systems that grow beyond moral restraint. They are not meant to be photographed clearly. They are meant to be recognized. The Bible consistently uses unsettling imagery not to provoke terror, but to awaken discernment. When such symbols appear, they signal conditions rather than events unchecked. Authority, distorted power, moral disorder rising beneath the surface of normal life. These visions are not predictions in themselves. They are warnings about the state of the world. Green clouds themselves are already associated with extreme instability. They often precede violent storms, hail, or tornadoes, moments when atmospheric balance collapses. When such clouds produce imagery that stirs ancient symbolic memory, it deepens the unease. Not because the shape must mean something, but because of when it appears. This was not a peaceful sky. It was not a neutral moment. It arrived during a period already saturated with strange signs: ruptures below ground, formations above the clouds, fire in the heavens, movement in the deep. Context gives weight to coincidence. Whether illusion or symbol, the shadowed shape added to a growing list of unsettling sky phenomena, each one alone explainable, each one together increasingly difficult to dismiss. Scripture warns that when disorder grows unchecked, signs multiply, not always to predict what comes next, but to reveal what already is. The green glow faded, the storm passed, but the image remained etched, not in the sky, but in memory. And in times like these, what lingers after the clouds move on often matters more than what appeared within them. As unsettling images continued appearing in the skies and storms hinted at forces beyond human control, another warning unfolded on the ground, this time with devastating consequences. In the U.S. state of Michigan, a dam failed with little to no warning. Within moments, massive floodwaters were unleashed, surging forward with unstoppable force. Entire neighborhoods were caught off guard. Homes that had stood for decades were swallowed in hours. Streets vanished beneath rushing water. Families fled with only what they could carry, while others scrambled for higher ground as the flood closed in. What shocked residents most was the speed. There was no gradual failure, no long evacuation window. One moment the structure held, the next, it was gone, its absence felt before it was fully understood. Sirens came too late for many. The water moved faster than warnings. Hundreds of families were displaced in a matter of hours. Lives were uprooted instantly. Schools, small businesses, and whole blocks disappeared beneath muddy currents. What had been familiar became unrecognizable, reduced to debris and silence. Officials cited heavy rainfall and structural weakness. The explanations were technically sound, yet emotionally hollow, because dams exist to restrain what cannot be controlled. When they fail, the trust placed in them collapses as completely as the barrier itself. Scripture has long warned about this kind of confidence. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Matthew 7:27. The message is not about weather, it is about foundations. What appears solid can still give way when pressure arrives. This tragedy was not imagination or interpretation. It was physical, measurable, irreversible, and that is why it matters within a broader pattern. Ground breaking open, skies twisting, fire appearing above, the deep stirring, and now, a man-made barrier failing in minutes. Warnings do not always come wrapped in mystery. Sometimes they arrive as collapse, exposing how quickly normalcy can vanish. If this resonates, leave a comment and stay alert. In a scene that seemed to defy instinct and memory, thick snow blanketed parts of the American desert land, long defined by heat, drought, and open sky. In Arizona, stretches of desert terrain disappeared beneath white drifts. Cactus-lined roads, rocky hills, and wide plains were transformed into a landscape more closely associated with high mountains than the Southwest. Residents were filmed walking through snow, laughing, touching it, even playing in it, acts once unimaginable in a region shaped by relentless sun. Meteorologists were quick to respond. Rare, they said, but possible. A collision of cold air, elevation, and seasonal anomalies, technically explainable. Statistically unlikely, but still within nature's extremes. Yet, explanation did little to soften the feeling that something fundamental had been reversed. Deserts are symbols of permanence. Their identity is stable, dry, predictable. They represent heat, that does not easily surrender. When snow falls, they're not briefly, not as a dusting, but thick enough to settle. It feels less like weather and more like interruption. Biblical prophecy often frames moments of warning not only through destruction, but through inversion, the natural order, bending in unexpected ways, heat turning to cold, dryness yielding to ice, the familiar behaving unfamiliar. Scripture speaks of times when creation itself reacts, when balance shifts, and what humanity assumes is fixed proves flexible. Snow in the desert carries symbolic weight because it contradicts expectation. It confronts certainty. It asks a question without words. If even this can change, what else is not as permanent as it seems? Historically, deserts in Scripture are places of testing, silence, and revelation. They are landscapes where distractions fall away and truth becomes unavoidable. When such a place is suddenly covered in snow, the symbolism sharpens. Cold, where heat should dominate. Moisture, where dryness rules. Stillness, replacing severity. Patterns once considered impossible are no longer hypothetical. They are appearing on camera, in real time, witnessed by ordinary people. Snowstorms in deserts, heat waves in frozen regions, floods where rain is rare. Each event can be explained in isolation. Together, they form a broader picture of instability. Biblical texts describe times when creation groans under imbalance, reflecting moral, spiritual, and systemic disorder. Not because nature has intent, but because it mirrors disruption. When extremes multiply, Scripture does not call for panic. It calls for awareness. What unsettles many observers is not simply that snow fell in the American desert, but how unshocking such events are becoming. The extraordinary is becoming familiar. The impossible is becoming documented. Each reversal lowers the threshold for the next. Heat turning to cold, sand turning to snow, certainty turning into question. This is not about predicting catastrophe. It is about recognizing a pattern of disruption that crosses geography, culture, and expectation. When deserts freeze and oceans warm, when skies burn and ground collapses, the message is consistent. What once felt stable is no longer guaranteed. Snow in the American desert is not just a weather anomaly. It is a reminder that the order humanity relies on, natural, social, spiritual, can shift faster than expected. And when reversals begin, Scripture suggests they are meant to be noticed, not dismissed. The sand remembers heat. The snow remembers cold. And when they occupy the same place, they force a question humanity has always struggled to answer. What happens when the world we recognize starts behaving like one we don't? Taken one by one, each event can be explained, debated, categorized, and eventually filed away. A flood here, a strange cloud there, fire in the sky, snow in the desert, movement in the deep, structural collapse, rare but possible, unusual but not unprecedented. That is how the modern world learns to cope with distance, labels, and reassurance. But Scripture has never warned humanity through isolated moments alone. It speaks of convergence. A world out of balance is not defined by a single disaster, but by many disruptions occurring across different realms at the same time, above and below, land and sea, heat and cold, stability and collapse. When imbalance spreads across systems that rarely intersect, it signals more than coincidence. It signals strain. The Bible often describes the last days not as a sudden end, but as a period of acceleration, birth pains that increase in frequency and intensity. Not every pain ends the process, but each one confirms that something irreversible has begun. The signs are not meant to terrify, but to awaken discernment in a distracted world. What makes this moment unsettling is not just what is happening, but how familiar it is becoming. Events that once would have dominated global attention now pass quickly, replaced by the next anomaly. The human mind adapts. Shock fades. The abnormal becomes background noise, and that desensitization is itself a warning. A balanced world behaves predictably. Seasons follow patterns. Foundations hold. The sky remains ordered. The deep remains hidden. When balance erodes, unpredictability spreads. Systems strain. Extremes replace moderation. Scripture describes this not merely as environmental instability, but as a reflection of deeper disorder, moral confusion, spiritual apathy, and misplaced trust. Warnings in the Bible are rarely loud all at once. They are layered, repeated, reinforced from different directions. Some come through nature, others through collapse, others through imagery that lingers in the mind long after it fades from sight. The purpose is not to provide dates or timelines, but to force a choice. Ignore the signs or examine the foundation you are standing on. A world out of balance presses humanity into uncomfortable questions. What is truly secure? What has been assumed permanent without examination? Where has confidence replaced humility? Scripture consistently teaches that when people trust structures, systems, and normalcy more than truth, warning signs multiply. This is not a call to panic. Panic blinds. This is a call to awareness. Awareness sharpens. Jesus himself said that when these things begin to happen, those who are watching will recognize the season, not because they fear the end, but because they understand the message. The signs are not the destination. They are the signal. If this perspective resonates with you, press like, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more, and thank you for watching.
Hold on.
Oh my god! Look at the size of that
While coastal cities across America vanish beneath rare, violent storms like a warning shot fired at an unprepared nation, California is receiving the message in a far more unsettling way. The ground is splitting. The waters are rising. And from beneath the earth, something long buried is being exposed. Something never meant to resurface. These are not isolated disasters. They are converging signals. The kind Scripture warned would come before the end, when the earth itself begins to testify. Is this divine intervention? Or the final warning before a greater event unfolds? What has now been revealed is leaving experts silent and believers shaken. Before we reveal what was found, subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell us below, do you recognize the signs? Amid climate chaos and social tension, a different kind of story emerges in California. Not in the headlines of politics, but in the silence of an ancient canyon. Kings Canyon, a glacier-carved valley over a mile deep in the Sierra Nevada of California, is known for towering granite walls, icy rivers, and nearby giant sequoia groves that have watched centuries go by. It is the kind of place people visit to feel small next to mountains and time. And now, it has become the place where the ground itself seems to open its mouth. There, as workers dug beneath the surface, they did not hit concrete or modern infrastructure, but a buried stone slab that appears to have lain hidden for generations. Its markings are not random scratches or modern graffiti, but deliberate, carved symbols that do not neatly match known tools, recent activity, or any familiar local tradition. It feels out of place, both in time and in context. What makes this discovery unsettling is not only what people think the symbols might suggest, references to an end time or a closing era, but when the stone surfaced, it did not emerge in an age of calm, when the nation felt stable and secure. It surfaced at a moment when land is collapsing in the West, waters behave strangely in coastal cities, lives are cut off suddenly, and the social fabric feels increasingly fragile. The stone was buried deep, well below casual reach, as if it was meant to stay out of sight until a different generation walked the surface above it. The soil that covered it was not just dust and rock, it was forgetfulness. When that layer was finally disturbed, what came up was not just geology. It was a question. Why now? Why did this message rise from American ground in this particular season of upheaval, and not a century earlier or later? Scripture repeatedly teaches a spiritual principle. What is concealed does not remain concealed forever. For there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, and nothing hidden that will not be made known. Luke 12:2. See also Mark 4:22. In the Bible, buried things, scrolls, prophecies, warnings, and signs do not surface when they are first created, but when their purpose is ready to be revealed, when people need to see them. Revelation follows God's timing, not human curiosity. If the King's Canyon stone is viewed through that lens, the question shifts. It is no longer only about which culture carved it or which tool touched its surface. It becomes a concern about a forgotten message, sealed beneath American soil, reappear during a time when the country is already shaking on so many fronts. The timing becomes part of the message. The stone did not arrive with a label, a manual, or a neat theological explanation. It simply appeared, forcing questions instead of handing out easy answers. It presses people to ask whether the past is speaking into the present, whether long-ignored warnings are returning because they are needed again. Scripture suggests that when the earth begins to reveal what it once concealed, it functions like an invitation, not to panic, but to reflect, to listen, and to prepare before the next chapter unfolds. This time, from beneath the ocean itself, where the deep begins to release what it has held in darkness for generations. Along the west coast of the United States, a strange pattern begins to appear. Multiple deep-sea creatures, species built for darkness, crushing pressure, and isolation, start washing ashore alive and uninjured on beaches where they do not belong. They are not storm-tossed victims or wounded refugees from a nearby disaster. They arrive calmly, as if something in the deep has shifted and quietly pushed them upward. What makes this unsettling is not a single encounter, but the number of reports and how close together they are in time. These animals are not bleeding, tangled in nets, or fleeing predators. They simply appear, as though boundaries that kept them in the depths are loosening. Scientists speak of changing temperatures, underwater disturbances, or altered currents. But even with these theories, the timing and concentration remain difficult to explain. In Scripture, the sea often represents what is hidden: unseen depths, unknown forces, mysteries beyond human control. When the Bible speaks of the deep giving up what it holds, it is describing a moment of revelation. Something concealed is brought into view. Something long buried can no longer remain below the surface. These moments are not always violent. Sometimes they are quiet, almost gentle, and yet deeply unsettling. They suggest that lines once firmly drawn are beginning to blur. When creatures adapted to the blackest parts of the ocean suddenly rise without fear or injury, it forces a question. What has changed below? And if the sea has begun to reveal what it once concealed, what else is preparing to surface? That question does not stay offshore. It moves inland, to a river that has shaped a nation's story. On the Mississippi, once called the backbone of America, fishermen who have worked those waters their entire lives start telling the same story. Something enormous, a moving shadow that snaps ropes, rips nets, and disappears into the depths as if the river itself were alive. Footage begins to circulate of a massive dark shape gliding silently and powerfully beneath the surface. Local headlines call it a mystery, but many believers hear an echo of that ancient question. In the Bible, creatures that rise from the deep are often more than animals. They are signs, living reminders of God's power and of humanity's limits. Even those who dismissed divine intervention admitted privately that the alignment of events felt uncanny, as though orchestrated by a hand beyond human reach. For many believers, the meaning was immediate and terrifying. The book of Job asks, "Can you pull in Leviathan with a fish hook or tie down its tongue with a rope?" Job 41. Leviathan is pictured as a symbol of pride, chaos, and rebellion, a force no human can tame. The Mississippi, strong and unyielding, becomes a mirror of the nation's heart. The uncatchable giant in its waters does more than expose the mystery of nature. It exposes a truth linger in the air. No one can control what God has decreed. The uncatchable creature in the river is not just a story. It is a reminder that God still governs what lies below and what lies above. A photo taken by a Michigan resident has gone viral, capturing a phenomenon that defies easy explanation. In the night sky, no fireworks, no meteor shower, there appeared a perfect ring of light, suspended like a flawless halo. It glowed white-blue, intensifying toward its center, like a circular gateway hanging in the heavens. Beneath it, thin beams of light shot straight downward, piercing the darkness like nails driven into the horizon. The formation remained perfectly still, hovering as if anchored in place. The light did not scatter randomly. It was deliberate, geometric, precise. Witnesses described the moment with trembling voices. It wasn't just light. It was ordered. A ring, complete and radiant, opening the sky above us. For a brief moment, many felt as though heaven itself had drawn near. Others across Michigan reported pulling their cars to the side of the road, stepping out in silence, phones raised, recording what they could barely comprehend. Days later in New Jersey, the same phenomenon appeared but altered. It opened like a gate of light, split into two luminous arcs, revealing a blazing core at its center. Beams fanned outward, like swords of fire cutting through the night. Families poured into the streets. Some stood speechless. Others fell to their knees, whispering prayers. One man said quietly, "It's like the sky is opening right in front of us." Social media ignited with images and unsteady videos. Some frames showed the perfect ring of light, smooth and symmetrical. Others captured the open gate, radiating brilliance so intense it washed rooftops and trees in pale fire. Skeptics pointed to atmospheric optics, light interacting with ice crystals at high altitude. Meteorologists suggested rare sun-pillar formations. Yet even some experts hesitated. The geometry was too sharp, too balanced, too exact. Random atmospheric effects do not normally form perfect circles, nor open symmetrically like doors. How could chance align light with such precision, then hold it motionless in the sky? Believers saw no contradiction. They turned to Acts 1:11, where the angels declare, "This same Jesus, who has been taken from you into heaven, will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven. To them, the gate of light in the sky was not coincidence, but symbolism. A reminder that the heavens are not sealed forever. If Christ ascended through the clouds, could he not return through a doorway of light? The images leave an unsettling question in their wake. Are these merely rare optical events, or signs written across the night sky? Whatever the explanation, one thing is certain. For those who witnessed it, this was not just weather. It was a message. Time is short, and the King is coming. Every time creation resists human control. When waters, ground, and sky together form a pattern, it is as if heaven is announcing that the age of arrogance is over. In Burbank, California, at sunset, the sky transformed into something that felt torn from another world. As daylight faded, thin clouds suddenly ignited, bending and stacking into a vertical ladder of light rising from the horizon into the heavens. Each segment looked like a rung drawn in molten fire. The colors were not those of an ordinary rainbow reds. Oranges, yellows, and blues were stretched upward, pulled into glowing columns, as if light itself were cascading down from above. Videos and photographs captured the moment, revealing something even more unsettling. The light appeared to flow along the rungs, moving up and down the luminous structure, as though an unseen presence were ascending and descending between heaven and earth. It was not chaotic. It was ordered. Witnesses spoke in hushed tones, saying it felt less like weather and more like a passage opening in the sky. The brilliance was so intense that rooftops and streets below were bathed in an otherworldly glow. Many immediately drew parallels to Revelation 10. 1. I saw a mighty angel coming down from heaven, clothed in a cloud, with a rainbow over his head. His face was like the sun, and his legs like pillars of fire. The image of the ladder of light columns burning downward seemed to sketch the outline of a colossal angel hidden within the radiance. To those watching, it felt as though a massive being stood concealed inside the structure. Of light itself, clouds as its garment, color as its crown, and fire as its feet. Social media erupted. Some called it a fire rainbow. Others said their hands shook as they watched the light move, convinced they were seeing a living echo of Scripture unfold above California. Skeptics suggested rare atmospheric optics, sunlight refracting through high-altitude ice crystals. But even among experts, there was hesitation. The vertical alignment, the step-like structure, the sense of motion along the light, these details were difficult to dismiss as coincidence. The formation did not drift or dissolve quickly. It stood, as if planted between two realms. What made the moment even more disturbing was what followed. Only days later, in Dallas, Texas, residents reported a long, resonant sound rolling across the sky. It came in waves deep, vibrating, and sustained. Not sirens, not aircraft, not machinery. Recordings captured a low trumpet-like tone, lasting nearly a full minute before fading into silence. People ran outside, staring up at empty clouds, hearing the sound come from everywhere at once. Many described chills, saying it felt like an unseen summons. Scripture came quickly to mind. Revelation 8-6 speaks of angels preparing to sound their trumpets. Matthew 24-31 declares, He will send His angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather His elect from the four winds. Together, the ladder of fire in Burbank and the trumpet-like sound over Dallas leave behind a question that refuses to fade. Are these merely rare natural phenomena, or are they signs written into the sky, long foretold and now unfolding? For many who witnessed them, the answer was already settled. The heavens are speaking, and time is short. Not long after the river began to whisper its warning, The sky over the heartland answered. In states like Texas and Kansas, the air turned heavy and green, as if the atmosphere itself were bracing for impact. Thick, bruised clouds rolled in, and within minutes the wind rose from a restless breeze to a force that bent trees, tore at rooftops, and hurled debris down streets. What had been an ordinary afternoon was swallowed by a storm that seemed determined to test everything standing in its path. Hail followed, not gentle pellets, but hard, jagged stones slamming into homes, cars, and bare fields with terrifying speed. In some towns, hail pounded for only a few minutes, but that was enough to shred roofs, shatter windows, and flatten an entire season's worth of crops. Orchards, vineyards, and fields that had taken months to prepare were torn apart in seconds. Farmers walked their land in silence, staring at broken branches and ruined fruit, realizing that a year of work had been erased in one violent cloudburst. Roads flooded as intense rain overwhelmed drains and ditches. Power lines snapped, plunging neighborhoods into darkness. Families huddled in hallways and basements, listening to the roar outside, wondering what they would find when the wind finally died down. Emergency crews fought blocked roads, downed trees, and rising water to reach people trapped in cars, damaged homes, and isolated rural areas. The storm did not just rearrange the landscape, it rearranged lives. In the aftermath, the cost was counted in more than insurance claims. Homes were unlivable. Vehicles were destroyed. Fields that once promised harvest now promised debt. Communities faced not only physical rebuilding, but the weight of uncertainty about the next storm and the next season. The land itself seemed tired, as if it had absorbed too much in too little time. In moments like this, when wind, water, and ice strike faster than human plans can adjust, prayer becomes more than a ritual. It becomes a cry from the middle of the storm. God, have mercy on this land. Comfort those who have lost their homes and loved ones. Give strength and wisdom to first responders, officials, and neighbors who are trying to hold shattered communities together. The sky that unleashed the storm becomes the same sky people look up to, asking if there is still a hand above the clouds that can calm what has been unleashed below. Before the questions could fade, another sign rose not from the fields or the rivers, but from the shoreline, and besnistered to the problems process. Even as America grappled with signs beneath and above, they did not stop. In the days that followed, new reports spread across the country, each one different in detail, but all echoing the same unease. Out west, the horizon turned the color of judgment. In the Rockies, wildfires roared through bone-dry forests and hillsides, moving faster than sirens could warn. By afternoon, cities hundreds of miles away sat beneath an eerie, copper-red sky. The sun dimmed behind a veil of smoke, and ash fell like gray snow on cars, porches, and playgrounds. What had once been lush land now glowed in lines of flame, fulfilling the prophet's picture of a place that looks like Eden before the fire passes, and a desolate wilderness behind it. Heaven sylvan the $7 in extent of vine. At the same time, the nation's waters began to send their own message. Along riverbanks and shorelines from Florida to Texas and up through the Pacific Northwest, reports of mass fish deaths and stranded marine life multiplied, thousands of bodies washing up without clear cause. In some towns, the stench of decay hung over harbors that once symbolized life and commerce. Locals stared at the surface of rivers and bays that seemed vibrant only months before, and whispered that the water felt tired, as though it had absorbed more than it could bear. In the heartland, drought reversed the storm's earlier violence. Fields that had once been flooded now cracked under relentless heat. Farmers in states like Kansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri watched crops wither before harvest. their soil turning from dark, fertile brown to brittle gray. The same land that had shaken days earlier now lay still. But its silence was not comforting. It was the quiet of exhaustion. For many believers, these events did not feel random. Scripture speaks of fire devouring before and leaving desolation behind, of creation groaning under the weight of human sin and longing to be set free. When skies turn blood red, fish die in heaps, and fertile ground fails all at once. The Bible urges people not only to measure losses, but to examine their hearts. To skeptics, these are simply the consequences of climate, mismanagement, and chance, a brutal but natural cycle. But to millions watching and praying, they form a pattern. Deep-sea creatures rising, rivers stirring, storms striking, seas burning, ground trembling, forests flaming, waters dying. It feels less like a list of disconnected disasters and more like a single, growing sentence written across a continent. Across America, this cascade of signs sent ripples through every community. On the beaches of Florida, families still gathered where the flames had danced on the waves, some kneeling in quiet prayer. In the smoke-choked towns of the West, neighbors handed out masks and water, while churches opened their doors as cooling centers and places to pray. In small farming communities, pastors stood between withered fields and full altars, calling people to seek the one who sends rain and withholds it. As the signs multiplied and communities responded in fear, confusion, and quiet hope, deeper questions began to surface, questions that no headline, chart, or hashtag can fully answer. What are burning waters, shaking ground, and restless skies really saying? Are they just a cluster of rare events? Or do they belong to a larger story, one that has been unfolding for generations and is now pressing closer to the surface? Throughout Scripture, moments when the natural order seems to bend, when waters overwhelm, skies darken, or the earth trembles, are not treated as meaningless accidents. They are woven into a bigger tapestry of covenant, warning, and redemption, reminders that creation is not independent from its creator, and that our world is moving toward a destination, not drifting without purpose. Jesus, in the Gospel of Luke, spoke of signs in the sun, moon, and stars, and of nations in distress, puzzled by the roaring of the sea and the waves, not to drive people into despair, but to call them to stay awake, to lift their heads, and to be ready rather than surprised. These images are vivid on purpose. They are meant to shake us out of spiritual sleep, not to paralyze us with fear. Revelation takes the picture further, with bowls poured out and trumpets sounded not as random catastrophes, but as warnings that grow louder when hearts grow dull, like alarms that escalate when previous ones are ignored. Paul, in Romans 8, describes creation groaning like birth pains, not to say that everything is falling apart without hope, but to show that even the shaking points forward to a future restoration. When creation and humanity are both set free, seen in that light, these recent events become more than frightening stories. They become questions from God's world to God's people. Are you listening? Are you awake to more than just the next crisis cycle? Are you willing to let shaking loosen your grip on what cannot last? Such questions call for more than scientific analysis or quick takes online. They invite spiritual discernment, a humble, watchful heart that can hold two truths at once, that not every disaster is a direct judgment, and yet none of them are empty of meaning. In every generation where the signs grew louder, the invitation was the same. Watch, pray, and interpret wisely, not to predict dates, but to live ready, anchored, and alert. Deep in the Appalachian Hills, something terrifying happened. It began silently. The clay drank the rain until it could drink no more. Then, the ground answered from underneath. No alarms sounded. No headlines warned of what was stirring below. Life continued along narrow valleys and old mining towns, unaware that pressure was building far beneath their feet in rock, in water, and in ways no one could see. When the shift finally came, it did not start with overflowing creeks. Ancient underground rivers long mapped, then forgotten, burst through fractured clay like opened veins. Water did not rush from the sky alone. It surged upward from the depths. Hillsides folded inward. Suspension bridges snapped as if cut from below. Abandoned coal tunnels became conduits, turning forgotten mines into violent channels that drove the flood straight into the heart of towns. Witnesses spoke with shaken voices. One local volunteer said the water did not behave like a flood at all. It came from places we never thought to fear, he said. Not the creek, not the rain. It rose under the road itself. Another recalled seeing the earth peel open, revealing layers no living person had seen, while the current carried fossils, massive whale bones, embedded in stone, silent reminders that these mountains were once under a sea. It was as if the land itself was confessing a story it had held in silence for ages. Entire communities were forced to leave, not by highways, but by water paths they carved in desperation. Boats were built from doors, barrels, and scrap wood. Families floated past church steeples and rusted mining equipment half submerged, navigating by memory instead of maps. What failed first was not the rooftops, but the ground beneath them. Foundations gave way quietly, as if dissolving rather than breaking. The most striking thing was not the chaos, but the exposure. Modern infrastructure, roads, pylons, reinforced slabs collapsed where they rested on shallow assumptions. Older stone embankments and tree-rooted hills endured longer. One engineer on site admitted, "We built for what we could see, not for what was beneath us." His words did not only describe concrete and clay, they described a way of life. For years, the region had been held up as resilient. Communities that could take a hit, economies that could bounce back, traditions that seemed unshakable. But as the water rose from hidden places, it carried more than mud. It exposed buried decisions, strip-mined hillsides, hollowed-out tunnels, cut corners, and forgotten warnings. What looked stable on the surface had been quietly weakened from within. Scripture has language for moments like this. Genesis 7 speaks of the fountains of the great deep breaking open, a judgment that did not fall from the sky alone, but erupted from beneath. Hosea warns about moving boundary stones, shifting ancient markers for gain, disturbing the order God set in place. In Appalachia, people began to ask whether they had not only moved physical boundaries, but moral ones as well, stretching what was acceptable, normalizing what once would have been questioned, assuming there would never be a consequence. Far north in Alaska, at the very start of a new year, a snowstorm arrived without the signs people fear most. It came in the middle of a winter already filled with headlines: fires in the west, floods in the heartland, storms along the coasts, when many hoped the calendar would reset what the country had just endured. No howling wind, no whiteout skies. The air itself thickened, as if cold had weight. Breath turned brittle. Sound carried strangely. And within that silence, pressure began to work inward. Ancient spruce trees, rooted for centuries, did not bend or fall. They split from the inside. The cold tightened faster than the wood could release it. Along the tundra, oil rail lines disappeared beneath dense, unmoving snow. Crews said the tracks were not crushed by force, but entombed by accumulation that never drifted, never blew away. It simply stayed. One pilot described hovering above a frozen valley when the aircraft began to fail mid-air. Ice formed on the rotor blades, not from moisture or storm, but from air so cold it seized exposed metal instantly. It felt like the sky itself had turned solid, he said later. Emergency landings were made without wind, without warning, under clear skies. People in the region could not help noticing the timing. While the rest of the nation argued about elections, markets, and conflicts abroad, the first days of the year brought a different kind of breaking point, one that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with limits. Job 38 once asked where ice is born, and who gives frost its strength. Those words surfaced again in conversations not shouted, but whispered, as if the season itself were answering. This was not a storm that attacked from outside. It worked inward, quietly exceeding thresholds that had never been tested. At the same time, same week, same winter, same uneasy start to the year, thousands of miles south, the Everglades turned to glass. Overnight, temperatures plunged far below what the wetlands had ever recorded. Marsh water hardened. The surface of the swamps turned to glass. Alligators froze in place, locked in survival postures they could not complete. Palm trees browned within hours. Entire groves died standing. As ice receded days later, the ground revealed remains long-buried animal bones preserved in sediment, exposed by frost that penetrated deeper than modern memory allowed. A park ranger remarked, "The land remembered something older than us." It was as if, in the middle of a nation hoping for a fresh start, the ground itself was bringing old things back into view. Psalm 147 asks, "Who can stand before his cold?" The question landed differently in a winter like this, after a year of billion-dollar disasters, social unrest, and a sense that every system was under strain. We prepared for storms, noise. We did not prepare for silence. Do you see the pattern? The issue was not snow depth, but temperature beyond expectation. In Alaska, not wind, but stillness beyond tolerance. In Florida, not a gradual chill, but a sudden drop that reached deeper than anyone thought possible. What unites these events is not geography, but method and timing. Nothing announced itself, no sirens, no violent transition. These things happened in the very window when people were making resolutions, setting plans, telling themselves, "This year will be different." Systems failed because they were built for averages. Life persisted only where adaptation had depth. One local biologist said it plainly, "We prepared for storms. We did not prepare for silence." These moments do not demand rushed conclusions. They invite examination, especially in a season when the whole country is asking what kind of year lies ahead. Cold, like water, does not argue. It reveals. It tests what has never been tested simply because it never had to be before. And when creation speaks this way, it does not accuse. The elements are testifying. Right at the turn of the year, in the middle of winter, while everything else is already shaking. Are you ready for what comes next? If this kind of reflection resonates with you, consider liking this video and subscribing if you want to keep exploring these quiet questions together. Stay with me as we step from this winter into whatever comes next. From the deep ocean to the heartland's soil, from winter silence to burning seas, the message is not that all hope is gone, but that borrowed confidence is running out. The foundations we never questioned are being tested in front of us. Physical foundations. Mines, levees, rail lines, pipelines, and suburbs built on assumptions that the land would behave as it always has. Economic and social foundations. Food systems, insurance models, grids, and local economies that strain under repeated shocks. Moral and spiritual foundations. Boundary lines moved little by little. Trust placed in what is temporary. and a quiet belief that tomorrow will always look like yesterday. When the deep stirs, water and cold do not argue. They reveal. They show where something has been hollowed out, thinned, or neglected. The floods exposed hollow earth. The fires on the sea exposed fragile explanations. The quakes exposed confidence in what was never guaranteed. This is not a script for panic. It is a summons to honesty. If the ground, the water, and the sky are all reminding us that nothing created is permanent, then maybe the wisest thing we can do in this hour is simple. Look again at what we're trusting, lift our eyes beyond what can be shaken, and live as if the one who warned of these days is also the one who still holds them.
Our top story tonight, a magnitude 5.0 earthquake struck near Susanville just under 2 hours ago.
Last night, the boundary between disaster and miracle dissolved across the American landscape, drawing global attention. Without warning, the ground itself began to convulse. From Michigan to North Dakota, a chain of earthquakes struck with an unnerving unity, not a ripple, but a coordinated shaking crossing state boundaries. Then, as the earth subsided, another sign followed. Along the Gulf Coast, starlight on the waves suddenly turned into an apocalyptic fire. Flames tore through the ocean surface. Coast Guard teams rushed to find a leak, a wreck, a reason.